Jules is going to share with us the case study from Monday, and we're going to talk through diversity and inclusion and the answers to the task questions. Thanks for joining us today, Jules. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey that you went through that led you to creating Lead Between the Lines?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Karen, and thanks for having me on this series. It's great to be a part of it and to give back to the community. So a little bit about my background. My background is that I come from the phys ed teaching background. I actually grew up in Perth, did my study over there and then moved to Melbourne, and then was really fortunate to teach over in London for about 6 years before coming back to settle in Melbourne and to have some kids as well, who you might see pop across the background, so apologies for that. Over in Melbourne at the moment, we're in lockdown. We're having to homeschool. And then after that, I moved across into teaching at the university space, and it was during this time I'd always been involved with coaching, obviously through my phys ed and playing sport, but it was really through my own children's love of sport that I got back into coaching their teams. And my son decided to play footy, and I went down to our local Auskick centre, and I noticed that there were no women or mums joining in to coach. And I was actually tapped on the shoulder the day I was down there and said, would you volunteer your time in the canteen? And I thought, I don't really want to volunteer my time in the canteen because I love being out on the field with the kids. So I put my hand up to coach. And I must say I was a little bit hesitant because football over here in Victoria is fairly male dominated, and there were 40 dads coaching, and I felt probably a little bit intimidated, even coming from a phys ed teaching background, that I was the only mum who'd put my hand up to coach. And through that year I realised pretty soon the dads that I was working with were really supportive, and they're like, oh, you actually know what you're doing because you're a phys ed teacher, can you help us? And then I realised that how much I could help in the community in that space. And we ran a clinic where we got more girls and women to come and coach and some girls to play. And the next year we had 7 mums coaching. So I think for me that was the start of trying to empower more women to get on board in our community sport. And then after that I went on to coach at a club level, my son, and there are a few things that happened that year that really made me think about some of the barriers and challenges that women face to get into coaching. And so I guess through that I was like, I'd really like to advocate for women and girls. And so I did a few other things, but one of the things since then that I've done is done some research at the university, and I'm about to embark on a PhD in that area. And I've also set up a consulting company called Lead Between the Lines with another PhD student at Monash University, and her name is Aish Ravi. And together I guess our purpose was to help. We're both teachers, so I think we really want to encourage and to teach the knowledge that we knew and that we'd found out through our own experience back to the community, to ultimately encourage that gender equality piece in community sport. That became, I think, really important to both of us. To see more women and girls in leadership and take that on. And I think you and I were just having a chat before about, the why piece of that. And I was saying how when I was young and I grew up I've done sport my whole life, lots of different sports, I didn't probably realise how I was being treated differently, or that I was being treated differently. And it wasn't until I became a mum with my own daughter and saw her being treated differently that became a purpose to me to try change that, to make it more equitable. So that's how Lead Between the Lines was born, to make that social change in our community.
And it's a consultancy business, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess what we really focus on is that education piece. So over the lockdown, obviously our goal was to be out with the people. We love, Aish and I really, that I guess, again, from our teaching background, we love the face-to-face and the interaction and meeting new people. And unfortunately, as we just started to take off and register our business, the lockdown came in over here in Melbourne. And so we jumped on board with the webinars, and we've been engaging with things like local councils who've tapped into community sports clubs. We've run a webinar series on gender equality, and then we've done quite a few action plans through that as well, where we sit down with the club and we listen to what their challenges are and to why they want to engage with this project. And then from that listening, we then help them to create some goals it's usually around to increase the participation of girls at their club. and women in sport, or it's to increase women in coaching or on the committees. And so I guess we work with them closely to identify how best to go about that. And that's essentially our core business of the consulting.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I can imagine that for many clubs, that's such an important resource to be able to really understand what they need to do, because I would imagine that quite a lot of people don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's been really an interesting journey, because we've had many clubs reach out to us. The amount of times I've been asked, Julia, how do I get more women coaching at my club? And a lot of the time that's a man asking me that. And they're really keen to get more women involved. It's just that piece around they're not quite sure how to go about that. And so that's been probably the really rewarding part of that job, is to be able to go in with some knowledge, I suppose, in that area and say, hey, this is how we can help, and to really have that social impact on the ground, which has been really, like I say, it's been really rewarding work. It's been great.
Yeah, excellent. And in the case study, there's mention about how change needs to happen in sport, particularly around gender equality, because the research shows that gender equality in sport can have an impact on how women are respected and treated in society.
Yeah. So obviously my area of expertise is not the domestic violence piece, but I think that was really when I started to read about that and then put all the pieces together of the jigsaw puzzle. I guess that was my first thing I realised. Wow, this goes really to the core of our society, and that was something that I hadn't realised until I started investigating further. That why don't women coach? And then in research we keep asking the whys. Well, women don't coach in sports clubs in male-dominated sports because they don't feel comfortable. Well, why don't they feel comfortable? Because they've never played the sport. Well, why have they never played the sport? So when you keep going back and unpacking those layers, you see that it goes right back to power, and that's really interested me. This notion of power and it really links closely to gender stereotypes, and something again that. When I started to read about it and unpack it, I thought, geez, I actually hadn't realised. And I remember just being in the laundry and looking at the laundry basket and seeing a sticker on there, and it was a woman hanging out the washing on the laundry basket. I was like, God, this is all very invisible to me. And I'd walk past the vacuum cleaner shop and just see all pictures of women with a vacuum cleaner, and the man was laying on the couch. And I thought, oh my God, I've been blinded to how we're just constantly, these gender stereotypes all day in our life, and that we have grown up with them, and they've become so, I think, accustomed in our culture that we don't even recognise they're there now. So for me, I really started to unpack that and realise, wow, there's a real issue here. And then the other one that I realised, which I perhaps hadn't before, was the amount of gendered language we use. And I even had to call myself out sometimes from using that. Things like, oh, man, the chat. And I'm like, oh, why am I saying man, the chat? That's quite gendered language. Or I come from, I've been a basketball coach, and we would commonly say, man up on the court. And I think for me that, that really opened my eyes up to, wow, we really do have a lot of, push the things that push us into those gender stereotypes without realising. And it's probably, it's really time now to change that gendered language and use something that's a lot more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always that play like a girl as well, I've heard before.
Yeah, which I think that's now really changing. I really think, like, in my daughter's 7, and I know she sort of calls that out to people's, adults' faces, but I think it's more the subtle ones that we don't recognise. Like I said, like looking at the laundry basket sticker, and I was like, oh, there's a woman hanging out the washing there. Like, and certainly in our house, I'm pretty lucky the roles are shared gender-wise, but I mean, in a lot of houses that it doesn't apply. And then the other thing that I started to notice too was that we're not very inclusive of, people that aren't in a heterosexual relationship, that everything is geared towards having a mum and a dad and the kids, and all of a sudden a lot of the language around that can be really a big barrier for people to participate in sport.
Yeah, definitely. And in the in the case study, before we move on to the task questions, you talk about the starting point being in leadership, and about actually starting to look at how women need to be represented, not just on the pitch but also on boards as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that Aisha and I have done is built a bit of a model around, obviously it goes back to that question that a lot of people ask us, how can we get more women and girls involved in leadership within our club? Or often it's to do with coaching, because that's mine and Aisha's sort of niche area, is the sports coaching. And really what sits at the heart of that for us is what I call courageous leadership. So there's so many times when we just assume that the president of the sports club will be a man, and so and the only people that get asked or tapped on the shoulder are the men within that club. So I think it is about, and again, it comes back to breaking those gender stereotypes down and saying, well, we've got plenty of capable women that could lead this club as well, or be in our leadership. And you'll often see on committees that the gender stereotype, especially here in Victoria and in those real male-dominated sports, cricket, soccer and football, the presidents and the vice presidents will be men, and the merchandise, secretary, canteen people will be the women. And again, I suppose that's what, when I talk about courageous leadership, I talk about that we can't just assume that, oh, there's a mum and she'll take the minutes at the meeting. That what other skills do the people have? Last year I coached my son's footy team, and we had a male manager, and he was the most organised, fantastic manager I think I've just about ever worked with. And again, it was great because we had a woman coaching and a male manager, totally role reversal of the gender stereotypes, and that it doesn't happen very often still. And I think that's part of that, like going back to the leadership, is that we've got to break the mold, and it's going to take courage, and it's much easier to stick with the stereotypes that we already have and what we've done before. But for us here in Victoria, obviously sport hasn't been on for 6 months, and I'm really trying to drive people's motivation to use this time, which has literally been a flattening, a levelling of everything over here in sport. Women and men's sport has come to a complete cease. That let's use it to rebuild. So the people, when we start to get people back into sport, let's think about people from diverse populations, or if we traditionally had 5 men in that role, well, why not mix it up with a couple of women, so that we're really stepping outside our comfort zone, and we're not. And there's the old jobs for the boys, or hires like, and really trying to unpack that so that we don't fall back into the trap of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we move on to our task questions, in fact, that leads us quite nicely into the first question. So what policy could you introduce to a community club to attract more women and girls to coach? If we're in that development time and we're action planning, what policy would you introduce?
So some of the things we talk to clubs about are making sure that your environment is really welcoming to women and girls. We hear all too many times that there is either no girls' change rooms at the sports club. There's either, like, I know I play footy, and last year when I was at particular clubs, you've got a footy team of masters women who all do need to go to the toilet before the game, and there's 30 of you in the team and there's one toilet, because the change rooms have been set up and designed for men's teams with a urinal sort of facility. So it's things like that. It might seem something minor, but that can be a barrier to women taking part, because they think, oh, I'm not going to do that. The club room's not very welcoming. Things like even just having clean change rooms to get changed in. A lot of women quite appreciate a clean change room to get changed in. So there's some of the things in creating a welcoming space. Obviously, when women come down, so one of the things that we do at our Masters Footy Club is women are really apprehensive to come down often and participate in footy for the first time. So the real key for us is the very first experience with the club is to make it super positive, and to really engage with that person, ask them about who they are, what are their needs. So that in teaching, that's sort of where I see the teacher coming out of me, in understand your learner, and in this case, understand who your future club member is and what their needs are, and perhaps what some of their anxieties are around that. So if we go back to the original question of making policies, it's things like facility planning and design, looking at funding and grants to be able to, perhaps putting that in your policy that you're going to apply for funding and grants to be able to up some of your facilities or upskill some of your women and girls. You might get specific training in, so you get a grant for specific training for women and girls. Measuring and monitoring and reporting procedures too are actually really important in your policies as well.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously things like your committees, they can be quite hard because it can be in your constitution, it can be hard to change, but definitely I would advocate for trying to increase, gender diversity on your committees. So, and I'm a big advocate for, if it's, for example, a netball club and you've got lots of women on your committee, that it's just as important to have that reverse gender equality and have a balance of men as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the welcoming element is important, isn't it? And there's also the aspect of imposter syndrome as well. So I would imagine that has a huge impact on the need for welcoming.
Yeah, and imposter syndrome is a really important one. I did some research last year with women who coach junior footy, and we looked at what was the biggest barrier and challenge to them currently coaching, and it really fascinating that a lot of women who did that survey talked about, I'm not good enough to be a coach. And again, we know that there's been a lot of research done around women in the workplace, and that, there's that saying that if there's a job and a man meets 2 out of the criteria, this is stereotypical, if a man meets 2 out of the 10 criteria, he'll think, oh, good, I'll give it a shot. Whereas a woman will meet 8 out of the 10 criteria and think, I'm not good enough for that role. So I think, again, it's coming back to when we welcome women in the club, they might be feeling quite uncomfortable and that they never played, for example, footy, but bring them in and say, well, great, what other skills have you got? How can we upskill you? Can we link you with a mentor to help you to learn some of those perhaps footy skills? But really in this setting, coaching a junior team is all about organisation, making it fun for the kids, building good rapport with the parents, and keeping the kids safe. So it's recognising the women's skills that might be a different skill set to what perhaps the men bring, but different is good. Different is good for everyone. If we have a diverse range of skills in our club, that's great for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. And that does lead really nicely into the second question, which is explain why diversity and inclusion with relation to gender is important in sport and the leaders of sport. What does gender equality mean, and what outcomes, I guess, come from that?
Yeah, so it's probably something I certainly didn't really realise how important it was really until I started investigating this, maybe 4 years ago. And I think growing up as a girl who played sport my whole life, I just thought, oh, that's just the way it is. You just got to put up with it, be tough, don't sulk about it, just get on with it. And like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't until I had my own daughter that I was like, hold on, this is a bit unfair. Why in 2020 is there still so much inequality around? So I think for me, the real reason links back to greater respect in our society, and that we still, as you and I were chatting about before, there is certainly that respect links into domestic violence. As I mentioned, it's not my key area of expertise, but there's certainly evidence to suggest that by increasing our respect for women, then hopefully that has a greater impact within homes and communities and workplace all around. So that's really our overarching reason why gender equality is important. Like I just mentioned, there's that pay gap still happening in society. So we're hoping, obviously, sport is a sort of micro community of what happens in our broader society. And it's interesting because if we look back at the history of sport, women didn't really heavily get involved in sport until the World War II. And World War II was when we know women entered the workforce because all the men were overseas as soldiers. And again, that was when women started to really take that initiative to be a part of sport as well, because I suppose there was probably more opportunity around because the men weren't around. So definitely, and I think that's been the sad thing for us here in Victoria with COVID, that we've seen a really big impact to women in sport because of COVID. So it's one thing that we'll all be heavily advocating for. We had this huge surge of women participating in sport, which was wonderful, and to make sure that we have that when we come back from COVID will be really important. Also, for me, it's about challenging stereotypes. When I was a kid, as I mentioned, growing up in Perth, often got called a tomboy. And I think for me, whilst I'm quite a strong character and I just brushed it off and said, oh, whatever, to hear that my daughter, who again is 7, is being called that, and I'm 40, so that's like 30 something years later, that I think that offends me now. I'm like, you know what, it's 2020. Like, just let kids be who they want to be. Let's not give them a label for it. And I probably look back now and think, it could be quite detrimental for people to call me that as a child, and that why was I labelled that just because I was a girl who liked sport? Like, to me, it didn't really tie into my femininity or masculinity. It just was what it was. I was a kid who liked to be active and play sport. And as I mentioned, those gender stereotypes are really rife still within our Australian community. Again, I mentioned my daughter. She goes to the cafe. There's a whole tub of biscuits. They're different colours. And the lady behind the counter says to her, do you want the pink or the purple one? And she just my daughter looked at me in horror like, Mum, what are they talking about? Like, this isn't right. And it's the same with Auskick a few years ago. They thought one of the initiatives would be to get pink footies for the girls. I mean, and most girls didn't even want pink footies. India wanted green. So, again, like really trying to move away from those gender stereotypes, which I think can be really damaging. And at the end of the day, inclusion and diversity is important for everyone. And we know from the business world that inclusion and diversity creates better communities. But for the business world, businesses are more successful when they have a diverse range of opinions coming into the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually from a soccer background. I played soccer quite a lot. And, I totally understand the concept of feeling sort of not quite sure. I did a soccer coaching qualification and I was the only girl on the whole course out of 30 guys doing this sort of basic level coaching qualification. So, yeah, I mean, that was about 20 years ago. But, yeah, I totally understand.
Yeah, well, not much has changed, actually, because my business partner, Aish, is looking at soccer coaches, and I believe 2% of soccer coaches are women. And she's got the double sort of level of discrimination being a woman, but she's also Indian. And so she finds there's a whole new level of stereotypes, I guess, that come with being a woman plus being an Indian woman with that. And like you say, rocking up to courses and being the only woman. And then, some of the comments that have come out can be pretty hurtful sometimes.
Yeah, I totally understand. And our final question then is, what other solutions can you suggest with regards to how to increase the number of women within leadership positions? So I'm looking forward to seeing what our trainers, what you come up with. But for yourself, Jules, what would you suggest? What are the solutions to increase the number of women within leadership roles within sport in general?
Yeah, so firstly, I guess I wanted to make the point that there's just not one quick solution. A big part of the reason that we have these problems is it's our culture. And unfortunately, changing culture takes time. So changing stereotypes, for example, probably will take a whole generation, if not longer. The other thing is that lost my train of thought. I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, I've got a long list here, so I'm going to shoot them off. These are some of the. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say some solutions will work for some clubs and some, challenges that they may face. But every club or every sports setting or every workplace and the people in it are very different. So even in two workplaces, the solutions may be different because of the types of personalities in those teams. So here's some of the things that I advise. So firstly, having mentors for women is really important. And that probably is an area that we've actually got better at, having more mentors for women in sport. Providing networks for women in sport, and it's something that I've been a part of setting up the Women's Coaching Association, just because we didn't have a coaching association that looked at Australia and broader to bring women who coach sport together. So that's a really important thing, is the networking. And like I say, not just within your sport, but across the sports, because we know from research that a lot of the barriers and challenges that women face getting into leadership in sport is actually the same no matter the sport. So together, collaboratively, is a good thing to support each other getting together. Tapping women and girls on the shoulder for positions. So again, coming back to that confidence or imposter syndrome, that's actually how I got into more serious footy coaching, because I was tapped on the shoulder. Even I didn't think that I could be a footy coach, coming with a phys ed background, because I hadn't played footy. I was tapped on the shoulder and said, no, with your phys ed teaching background, we'd like you in this development program. So that's really important. Modifying criteria for courses so that women are meeting the criteria. So, for example, when I coached for a year in my foundation level of coaching, I wanted to do more professional development, and the football criteria said that I had to coach at a foundation level for 3 years, even though my coaching background is 25 years of coaching, phys ed teaching, etc. So I actually reached out to the AFL and I talked very calmly and politely to them about those criteria. And we managed to do some work to get the criteria changed for women, so that women coming from other sports could get what we call RPL, recognition of prior learning, to be able to meet the criteria to do more professional development. So there's that can be quite a big barrier for that. And don't forget that women coming from other sports or changing, settings, bring with them lots of skills that they already have from those other settings that are really useful in a different setting. Having women and girls as ambassadors and role models and leaders. And if you work in a club environment, using all your club members as your audience to promote on social media, because there's so many great things that those people do in your club. So why not promote it? Assisting in child-minding and family-friendly environments. So when I coach, I sort of say to my club, look, I'm here volunteering my time. I have children, they're going to be here with me, and most of the time they're pretty good about that, but it still can be a little bit challenging, and we still have this barrier around family-friendly, coaching or leadership positions. And I think that's been challenged a little bit during this lockdown for us, because obviously, like, even you can see my background, the kids and things like that, where perhaps before it was really unacceptable and deemed as unprofessional. Now it's forced us into this mode, well, this is the only way that we can operate, so let's be a little more flexible with that. Media coverage, making sure that it's balanced, and this is sort of a whole inclusion piece. So something I know I am very conscious of now, because I work with Aish, like I mentioned before. Aish is Indian, and she's always saying to me, you haven't got enough diverse nationalities in the photos, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't. So there's that, and there's a bit like that with the gender piece too, that when clubs put up pictures of, oh, we want women in leadership, obviously they probably would, for that type of thing, post a picture of a woman, but it might be, oh, we're after coaches, and they only have a picture of a man coaching. So really important that in your social media coverage that you're covering gender, both genders in that. And like I say, really extra great if you can also cover more diverse populations as well, just to be more inclusive. As I mentioned previously, using inclusive language, we don't realise how much of our language is gendered. Even things like, hey guys, when in the group, like in the email, it might be women and men. I know I've certainly been guilty of that, because that was something I used to use all the time. And I suppose that's the thing we don't, or in footy, we might say, hey guys, come in, and when it's a bunch of women, or you might say, hey ladies, come in, and like they don't want to be called ladies. So again, just talk to the playing group or to the club or to the people you work with about how those people want to be addressed. Would be my advice. And then when you're sending emails or talking to people, try not to use gendered language, because that can be exclusive. And I think when you do, because like I say, even I do, my head's in the gender space the whole time. And even I, the other day, like I said, I was saying something to someone, I said, oh, I'll man the chat. And I was like, oh, I said man the chat. I was like, oh, sorry. So I think just calling it out when you do, if you do notice yourself using gendered language, it's okay. Like we're sort of in this transition phase where we're trying to, I think we need to be comfortable with having those difficult conversations and calling it out. Having a pathway for players. So in our sports clubs, having a pathway into leadership for our women. So one of the things we do at my junior footy club is we have a development coach program for some of our older girls to get involved with coaching, and they coach our under 8s and under 9s. So that having that the pathway for women to get into leadership is a great idea. And what coincides with something like that is job sharing. So if women are lacking that confidence, feeling a little bit underprepared, then why don't you make one of your committee positions or your leadership positions a job share and tee them up with a mentor who's a bit more experienced to give them that confidence. And the other thing I would say is using research to support your strategies. So there's a lot of talk around in the inclusion and diversity space, and I like to say there's a lot of talk and not always a lot of action. And I suppose that's one of the things I'm really about, is that we need to act. We need to have those uncomfortable conversations. So if like I was just saying before, if someone is using gendered language, then politely just say, oh, did you know? Because they probably actually don't realise that they're doing that and that can be exclusive. So, and obviously with the coaching piece, I know there's a lot of research out there in America to support making sure that we're familiar with some of the research that's been done to support our best practice and policy in sport for development here in Australia. So a long list.
But it's incredible, and I'm so grateful that you've been willing to come and share that expertise with us, because all of those strategies are so important. And now letting our young people and this being communicated through our trainers is so important, because it's going in with the right mindset at the outset. And on your mention about the Women's Coaching Association and providing that opportunity for young, for new coaches or women to explore and get those role models and learn from them, how can young female students or our coaches in our training community, how can they reach out and find out more about that?
Yeah, so we're in the process of building our Women's Coaching Association webpage. So if you just Google Women's Coaching Association, you'll be able to find that quite easily. We're also on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And like I said, we're in our sort of foundation stages of setting that up. But I'm happy for people to contact me. So probably at the moment, do you want me to give my email on the video, or is it good to let you in?
We'll also include it in the Friday newsletter where we send all these details as well.
Yep. So the best email to contact me on would be julia.hay, Hay, @monash.edu.
Awesome.
And shoot me an email and I can send you the links as well. Or you can also have a look at my LinkedIn profile. So I'm on LinkedIn as Jules Hay, and I've got all the links to the web pages on there as well.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And those strategies, it is a long list, but as I said, so valuable, and so many people don't know where to start with diversity and inclusion, particularly around gender equality. We know so many people know that there's a need for it, and there's so much media and so much sort of discussion around what is considered a token move and what is genuine strategy. So it's really good to hear those actions that can be taken.
I think one of the other things that I haven't said that I think is really important is to have a woman driving it. So you might, a lot of the time, it's actually the men who reach out to me and say, hey, Julia, how do we get more women involved? But I say to them, I love your passion and I love that you want to do that. But what you need is a woman by your side, someone from your club, your community, to support you. Because it's a little bit, I find myself that women certainly listen to men, but if it's a woman driving it, there's got to be a woman partly driving it as well on the ground, because a woman saying to another woman, you can do it, look, I'm doing it, I'll help you, I'll mentor you. I find that's been a really powerful thing to encourage more women to jump on board when there's already one, you know, in the leadership that's advocating for them and sponsoring them in essence.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, when other women see other women doing it, it's definitely more encouraging.
It's that you can't be what you can't see. So unless we have someone there driving that, you know, that will, you know, I think certainly men can drive that, but I think it certainly helps and it makes their job a little bit easier if there is a woman also collaborating with them to drive that increase in women and leadership in the club or the sports setting.
That's, yeah, absolutely. And on that note, I will, we've come to the end of all our questions now. And as I said, thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's been incredibly interesting and helpful, and I'm sure it will really feed into a lot of classroom discussions and also you know, planning and activities for what can happen, not just in the vocational certificates, but actually in the coaching space as well. Yeah, so thank you so much.